Hi everybody, it is your human anatomy and physiology teacher, Mr. Poser. Today we are continuing our 5th unit on the muscular system by discussing what muscles are made of in terms of their cells, the structure of an organ. We're going to have a couple diagrams to fill out today, including the structure of, well, one particular muscle. And then we're also going to get into the individual units of contraction, because that's what muscles do. All they do is contract. We're going to get into those individual units called sarcomeres later on in this video as well. So we'll have 2 diagrams to fill out today. So if you have access to them, I would suggest having those open as you're watching. All right, so we can fill that out together. All right, so let's get into it. Muscle makeup. What are muscles made of? Well, muscles are made up of tissues, when tissues are made up of cells, right? But here's the thing about muscles. Muscle fibers are muscle cells. Okay, so one particular muscle cell, it's called also known as a muscle fiber, is one long cylindrical cell, particularly if we're talking about skeletal muscle. Okay, in other types of tissue, like say connective tissue, your cells and your fibers are 2 separate things. Your fibers are non-living and your cells are obviously living. But that's not the case here. The cells are the fibers in this case, so I don't want us to get that mixed up. Skeletal muscle contains bundles of cells wrapped in connective tissue, and those cells are long striped fibers. All right, so kind of imagine this. Imagine taking a bunch of like electrical cords or computer cords, whatever, all right, and bundling up and putting a zip tie around them, okay? And then you make like 4 or 5 of those bundles of cords, okay? And then you put them all together, and then you put a bigger zip tie around all of them, okay? Imagine that in your head for a second. That's what a muscle is like. A muscle is bundles of fibers, and we're going to be looking at a picture of that in just a minute. So any particular muscle, if we're talking about biceps, trachea, trapezius, all that kind of stuff, those are bundles of fibers. All right, and we're going to look at that in a second. Each cell contains thread-like filaments called myofilaments, and those are even kind of thinner cylindrical proteins. We're going to be looking at those later on as we get into the microanatomy. All right, so this is the macroanatomy of a muscle. This is a skeletal muscle. It's not a particular skeletal muscle, but it's generalized. But anyway, we know it's a skeletal muscle because, let's start labeling here, it's attached to a bone, right? So there's a bone. Every skeletal muscle is attached to a bone via a tendon. A tendon is a type of connective tissue. All right, so it's connective tissue is, well, connecting the bone to the muscle, right? So what is this stuff over here? As I said before, we got fibers, then we have a bundle of fibers, then we have bundles of fibers, and that makes up the muscle. All right, so if we start at the very, very inside, this guy right over here, you see the stripes on there, skeletal muscle. This is what we call a muscle fiber. And then muscle fiber is an individual cell. Okay, they're kind of big cells, and they have a lot of nuclei, right? They're multinucleated if they're skeletal muscle. Okay, a bunch of these muscle fibers put together in a group. It's kind of sticking out here. This is called a fascicle. A fascicle, kind of like icicle, but it's called a fascicle. All right, so a fascicle of muscle fibers. Okay, that's a connection. It's a bundle of fibers. And then we have a bundle of fibers here, and that makes up the muscle. All right, but to wrap all of these up, okay, we're going to have 3 different what are called fascia. Okay, and those fascia are kind of like the zip ties that are holding together the bundles of fibers and the fibers. All right, so the 3 different fascia that we have, this outermost one out here, okay, that holds the whole muscle together, the biggest zip tie, is called the epimysium. Epimysium. Okay, so if we're starting from the outside and going in, I know I'm kind of switching it up a little bit, but the epimysium is the biggest fascia that goes around the whole muscle. All right, it's kind of like a membrane. It's made of connective tissue. Surrounding individual fascicles over here is another fascia called the perimysium. Mysium. Okay, peri means around, as we've discussed before. Epi means above. Okay, so epi, then peri. I'm running out of space here. Let's move my face down here. There we go. There's the perimysium. Okay, and then wrapping around each individual muscle fiber within a fascicle is this arrow over here, and that's called the endomysium. Okay, endo means inner. We've seen that prefix many times in human anatomy and physiology so far. All right, so there's our three, and by the way, yes, so these are called fascia. Okay, anything that ends with mysium, those are called the fascia. All right, and those are acting as kind of like the connective tissue zip ties that go around the fibers and the bundles of fibers. All right, and then finally, this structure over here that we're pointing to, we're going to find this on a lot of our diagrams. These are blood vessels. Okay, just so you know, muscle cells need lots and lots and lots and lots of oxygen. They're ATP hogs. Okay, about 40% of your ATP is just used by your muscular system. Yeah, they're ATP hogs. They need a lot of energy, and thus they need a lot of oxygen. So they need to be very well vascularized. All right, so there's your this is your anatomy of a particular muscle, one single organ. All right, let's talk about contraction a little bit. All right, in our next video on the sliding filament model, that's the molecular level of muscle contraction. How does it work? Way down talking about proteins and ATP and that kind of stuff. All right, but how do muscles contract and how do they exactly work together? Well, muscles, as we just looked at here, have 2 points of attachment. Okay, so they're usually attached via a tendon to 2 separate bones or in 2 different spots on one single bone. So the origin is a point of attachment to a bone that stays relatively motionless, and the insertion is attached to the bone that moves the most. All right, so if we're talking about the biceps brachii here, we can say the origin is towards the shoulder because it doesn't move when I contract it, but when I do contract it, it moves my forearm, right? So the insertion is going to be over here by my antebrachial region. I'm not really sure exactly what it is, but you know, if I had it memorized, I could tell you. But the origin is the part that's going to be relatively motionless, and the insertion is going to be the part that moves. So in order for me to flex and extend my forearm here, okay, here's my origin, here's my insertion. Muscles and bones act like a system of levers. All right, so for an example here, I'm going to continue talking about the biceps and triceps brachii. Muscles usually work kind of against each other to achieve motion. Now, how does that even make sense? How are they doing 2 opposite things but achieving one goal? Well, it works like a system of levers. Okay, your biceps, in order to flex, okay, is going to contract. Okay, while your triceps relaxes. Okay, it's able to. So let's see that again. I got a GIF over here too. But your biceps is going to contract, pulling your forearm closer to you. Okay, and your triceps is going to relax. And the opposite is going to be true if I extend. If I go this way, okay, my bicep starts to relax and my triceps start to contract. All right, so they kind of work against each other. They do 2 opposite things in order to achieve one result. Okay, so the triceps brachii and biceps brachii are examples of an agonist, which causes a motion, while an antagonist kind of works against it. Okay, I don't really like that wording all that much, but you get what I'm saying. They're doing opposite things to achieve one particular motion. So biceps and triceps are agonist and antagonist. Okay, here's some other terms. We're going to get into the kind of the microanatomy of muscles here. And you'll notice here, check it out, I put sarco. Well, all of these terms start with the prefix sarco. So sarco is obviously referring to muscles, and particularly at the cellular level. Okay, so what we're about to take a look at a diagram of is called a sarcomere, which is made up of what we call myofibrils. Myofibrils are proteins that are going to be pulling on each other that allow a muscle to contract. Thin filaments are made up of a protein called actin, and thick filaments are made up of a protein called myosin. All right, we're going to look at these in just a second here so you can get a visual of what I'm talking about. Okay, so myofibrils are like actin and are made of actin and myosin. The sarcolemma is the plasma membrane of a muscle fiber. So since it has muscle cells are kind of special cells, they have a special name for the plasma membrane. Okay, so neurons, which are nerve cells, have to interact in such a way with the muscle cells to tell them what to do, right? So the sarcolemma plays a big role in receiving a message from the nervous system, like, hey, you got to contract or you got to relax. All right, you got to relax. Sorry. All right, and then the sarcoplasmic reticulum sounds like the endoplasmic reticulum, right? The sarcoplasmic reticulum is in the cytoplasm, and it stores thousands of myofibrils, and it releases. I'm going to put something else here. It's not letting me type. Okay. I'm going to say stores and releases calcium. I'm just going to put Ca for calcium. I'm going to put Ca plus. There we go. Calcium ions. Those are going to play a big role in muscle contraction. We're going to see that in our next video. All right, and then the cytoplasm of a muscle cell is called the sarcoplasm. And in the sarcoplasm, it has a lot of stored energy in the form of glycogen. Glycogen is a big, long polysaccharide energy storage molecule that's made from linking a bunch of glucoses together. All right, but it's a storage molecule. Muscles are energy hogs. They need a lot. They need a lot of glucose. They need a lot of oxygen and a lot of ATP in order for them to function properly. Okay, so here's some terms about the microanatomy here. Now, as I said here, notes. Words used to describe muscle start with myo and sarco. All right, so here's another word that starts with a muscle prefix. Myofilaments are the light and dark bands that give the skeletal muscle the striated appearance. So the myofilaments are made up of, well, we talked those two proteins that I mentioned before, actin and myosin, and we're going to become very familiar with actin and myosin in our next video talking about the sliding filament model. All right, when muscles are stimulated, all muscles do, class, all muscles do is they contract and relax. That's it, okay? And how they're oriented, how skeletal muscles are oriented within the body, where their origin is, where their insertions might be, allows us to have these refined motions. But truly, all muscles do is contract and relax, okay? Just pulling on you in different directions in order to allow all of our different complex motions. All right, the unit that carries out contractions is called a sarcomere. All right, so a sarcomere is the diagram that we're going to be filling out on the next page. The sarcomere of each muscle fiber is going to be contracting. One muscle fiber is going to have a bunch of different sarcomeres. Remember how it's striated? Okay, it's striated because each one of these, okay, this is what we call a unit of contraction, or a sarcomere. So let's label our sarcomere, everybody. All right, so as I had mentioned before, this is an individual unit for contraction. So this whole thing, this whole stretch is called the sarcomere. Now I know this looks like some kind of weird, I don't know, abstract art, okay? But this is the individual unit of contraction. So these are proteins that are going to be sliding past one another through the sliding filament model to allow your muscles to contract. All right, so this is called a sarcomere. All right, these red and blue lines, these are our different what are called myofilaments. You've got two of them. The blue ones are what we call the thin filaments, also made of, that are also known as actin. So actin are the thin filaments. We're going to get very familiar with what actin and myosin are in our next video, which means that the red filaments, the thicker ones, are called, well, thick filaments, made up of myosin. So these two proteins, they're going to be sliding past one another, hence what's called the sliding filament model of muscle contraction. We're going to look at that next video. I know I keep alluding to that a bunch of times. Okay, so this line, these two lines over here, where there is no overlap of these two filaments, so you see this kind of zigzag over here, more appropriately, this is called the Z line. And so every sarcomere is separated out from Z line to Z line here. Or, well, kind of. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But here's the Z line. It's kind of appropriate. It's shaped like a Z, right? Right in the middle, okay, where we have myosin, but we don't have actin. Okay, and we've got these these markings here that make up the striations on the skeletal muscle. This is called the H zone. Okay, so we got Z line, H zone. Let's see this bracket over here. So the sarcomere, we can divide it up into 3 brackets. Okay, where there's no myosin, these are called the I bands. Okay, so the I band is where there's no myosin, and there's one over here too. It's called the I band. All right, and then where this part in the middle, okay, the H zone is where there's no, there's no actin. Okay, so where they're overlapping right in the middle, this is called the A band, where the myosin and actin are kind of overlapping each other, and they're going like this, okay, in order to allow for contraction. Then finally, these dark lines over here that we see in the H zone, these are called the M lines. All right, so the M lines and the Z lines are really they're the striations that we see if we're looking at a picture of skeletal muscle. All right, that is it for this video. Please let me know if you have any questions. We'll see you next time. Bye.